Thank you, Cyrus, on the conversation. We switch gears now to Sudan, where after 10 days of urban combat that resulted in the death of hundreds, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire starting on April 24th, according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Previous attempts to pause the conflict were unsuccessful, but Blinken stated that intense negotiations led to the agreement. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that Sudan was on the edge of the abyss and that the violence could engulf the whole region and beyond.
The fighting involved forces loyal to Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and those of his former deputy, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, popularly known as Hemeti, who commands the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The truce will enable dialogue on the modalities of a permanent ceasefire. According to the main civilian bloc ousted from power in a 2021 coup, the Forces of Freedom and Change, at least 427 people have died and more than 3,700 have been wounded, according to UN agencies. The Assistant Administrative Attaché at Cairo's embassy in Khartoum was among the latest fatalities, according to Egypt's foreign minister. Now joining us on this very important discussion is Elbashir Idris, a public affairs analyst, who joins us on the conversation. One welcome to you, Elbashir, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, let's start with, let's get straight to the action, Elbashir. What prompted the 72-hour ceasefire between Sudan's warring generals, and what measures were taken to ensure its success? Who were those involved in coming up with this ceasefire agreement?
Well, since this is now the fourth time that a ceasefire had to be brokered since the start of this conflict from the 12th of April, the 15th of April, it's come to the point now where the trust towards the RSF and the SAF is completely broken, that within the civilians and that within the international community. The constant breaking of this is what's led to an escalation by the international community, as seen with the United States Department of Defense, who said that they created a U.S. Special Task Force for Sudan. And when it came to the evacuation of the diplomats and the embassies, the Americans even provided firepower through the sky of AC-130, which was used to add pressure to the warring parties in Sudan. So that way is to show firepower. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why this deal is holding and these ceasefires are holding. Though I have heard reports personally from the ground that there has been moments when this ceasefire has ended or rather been broken, it's fair to say that for the majority of the time, people are still trying to evacuate. And this is why the ceasefire has been created. There's too many internationals within Sudan, 16,000 Americans, 4,000 British, hundreds of EU nationals and more. And within the African expats, we do have hundreds of thousands working there. So in order to de-escalate a really growing situation that could involve not just a regional issue, but an international issue, the ceasefire had to be made. Otherwise, we were looking at a situation that could have quickly and easily involved direct action and combat from the international community. And I don't think that's something anybody wants within the country, the region, and internationally as well.
Okay, Elbashir, I mean, we're looking at a situation of things at the moment. We've seen lots of reports talking about the humanitarian aid due to this conflict going on in Sudan. We also have situations about the prison, looking at prison being disrupted and all of that. So what's the situation on ground at the moment in Sudan?
So a statement was released by the Freedom of Forces and Change, who were the civilian element and component during the times of the revolution, and a civil society alliance, talking about this prison break. Now, quick context. The prison in question is Koba prison. And within this prison, the former Islamists who were in charge of the 30-year regime of Sudan were placed in there. Now, it's been reported that they remained inside this prison up until they were freed by Islamist sympathizers within the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces side, and they were essentially given the key to freedom. These are men who are wanted by the International Criminal Court for their role in genocide in Darfur, with ample amounts of evidence. Now, one of the developments from that situation was an individual named Ahmed Haroun, who was the former governor of South Kordofan, and he himself is indicted by the ICC, by the International Criminal Court, for his role within the genocide. So this, the FCC, the Forces for Freedom of Change, have also said that this kind of confirms the role that these Islamists had in propagating this violence, beginning it and seeking to profit from it, especially from the destabilization that we're seeing right now. Furthermore, the Islamist forces, or rather Ahmed Haroun, through his statement, through an audio clip that's been released on the internet, had tried to mobilize the Sudanese people to side with the Sudanese army in order to combat this crisis. So unfortunately, we're seeing point scoring and political plays trying to be made to the Sudanese people to try and side them into one side or the other of the conflict, whereas the people do not want to get involved. They are not involved, and they are just the victims. So it's a real shame that people within, well, as expected from the previous regime, are trying to mobilize and move people into choosing a faction that will just only end up with their loss of life. So as we can see with the prison break, it's opened up a whole can of messy worms here. And regarding going to future, we may see the return of the Kazan. So it is imperative that these elements, these remnants are stopped, that we are made aware, and that whatever damage they cause, we stop them immediately or keep it at a minimum if we wish for humanitarian support and assistance towards each other and from the international and from the regional partners to come. These guys only seek to destabilize at the end.
Now, talking about international partners and, improving the situation in Sudan, we have a ceasefire that is currently ongoing, and the United States and Secretary of State Antony Blinken was very instrumental in putting this together. Now, how have foreign nations, both in the West and the Gulf, how have they responded to the conflict in Sudan, and what measures have been taken to evacuate their citizens and embassy staff? And beyond just getting the people out of Sudan, is there humanitarian aid coming in? And is there some type of negotiations to, make this, build on this ceasefire and make it long term, so people can have a semblance of normalcy and life can return to the way it was before?
Well, if we want to go into the humanitarian aid from, say, international organizations, we're still yet to see them. So we're not hearing anything from the UNHCR. We're not hearing much action from the UN itself, other than just strong words of condemnation. When people are now reaching the border, for example, on Egypt, they're waiting now at least 5,000 to 8,000 people plus who are trying to go through the borders, and that takes days of processing. And if we have people with no papers, that's going to be longer. On the other hand, as well, since there is a very limited amount of supplies, it's become, and there's no bedding, there's no medicine, food, nor shelter. People are becoming quite weary as they reach to the border, and it's growing into a humanitarian problem between the Sudanese and Egyptian border. So even if there is no UN presence within Sudan, the UNHCR and the UN and its multiple bodies should at least send teams to the Egyptian border so they can send in supplies to that Sudanese-Egyptian border. So they're able to assist in the evacuation and the processing of the migrants leaving there. Furthermore, me currently, I'm coordinating the evacuation of over 800 people, those internationals. And from what I've seen from my own experience, We're hearing reports that the airport named Wadi Sayedna, which is a bit north of Khartoum, where a majority of internationals are being evacuated from, it's essentially an airfield. There is no medical supplies, there is no shelter, there is no food, and it's the middle of nowhere. And people were expecting at least supplies or some sort of presence on the ground and organization from previous flights that have landed and picked people up. They were expecting supplies to be left there. However, since there was none, people have been waiting at that airfield day and night with nothing. The days are hotter, the colds are night, and how people are being able to protect themselves, it does come into question, and how to fend for themselves. Also within the embassy websites, they have not made a warning to their citizens that the airport in question, Wadi Sayedna, is open desert-like conditions. And as such, people have gone there unprepared. And the only ones who are helping within this evacuation are civilians from inside and outside of Sudan trying their best. So we're seeing... Sorry, after you?
No, go on, please. Go on.
Thank you. So we're seeing a lot of holes when it comes to this evacuation that it should have been the job of international orgs. However, normal civilians are now taking this up, and it's completely not fair on them. But however, as the attention focuses on the international aspect, we do need to take into regard that of African expats as well. I've had reports of people being able to, from Mali, from Senegal, who have been able to escape Khartoum and get into the peripheries, into the other states. However, that question of now of them getting out of Sudan and to get on to the other side of the continent, that does need to be looked into. I don't think international partners would do so. So a regional kind of initiative, or rather a continental initiative, is needed to make sure that the rights of not just those outside of Africa, but those within Africa are protected, and they are sent back safely to their home countries.
Now, still on this evacuation process, the humanitarian situation in Sudan, we're looking at a general picture. I mean, the impact of all of this, because we're still seeing a large amount of refugees. I mean, on one side, we see refugee situations increasing as a result of this conflict. And we're seeing situations where even in Ethiopia, which is at the border point there, we still have conflicts going on there. So on the broader picture, if this is not curtailed soon enough, if we do not have international partners or regional partners to douse the situation, what would be the big picture impact of all of this conflict?
We may be going into World War III. Let's just get straight into it. The whole problem with this is that since it's sponsored by foreign interests, such as America in some parts, such as Russia in other parts, such as the Arab states on some sides. I've done my own personal investigations and even seen how countries in Africa have also profited of this. So this current state of evacuation, please understand this is an interlude, and that chances are it will get worse. History does tend to repeat itself through the lessons we've seen, and that is the generals cannot be trusted. That once the evacuation is over, a de-escalation will happen due to the belief of national sovereignty and that the army is supposed to rule things. Now, however, it is that very same belief that has led to the collapse of this country. So it's very important that the international community and the continental community does not continue to enable the military leaders in diplomatic talks, in believing that they have the capacity to run a government and run the country, because it's already gotten us here. So if we were to wish a regional spillover, or even more international calamity that can bring in multiple parties and state actors, it is very imperative that all people come together on a round table to discuss the situation in Sudan before it continues spilling over into neighboring nations. Sudan strategically is a very important nation with its position on the Red Sea within the east, but within the west, it connects to the belt of Africa. And if we see how history is, well, not even history, just what we've seen in the last few years, there seems to be a network of Russian influence running across this belt in Africa. And as such, Sudan does prove as a real linchpin, you can say, in that equation. So if we don't want to see any more issues, then we really have to come and assess the future of Sudan, but as well as hopefully maybe some kind of mechanisms in place that won't allow it to fall under influence that could destabilize the region.
Now, finally, Elbashir, if you can, in less than 2 minutes, I really appreciate. This crisis has become an existential matter for the two generals, and you have innocent Sudanese people caught in the crosshairs. And like you rightly mentioned, there are also geopolitical and strategic interests from outside Sudan. You have some supporting the RSF and some supporting the SAF. So in what ways going forward can this really work for the people that matter, the ordinary Sudanese people, without the international community picking side and playing geopolitical games with the lives of ordinary Sudanese people? What will be the best way, the best approach to ending this conflict?
Well, I wish I had the complete answer to that, but one of the things I would love to definitely see people on one side, the conflict is going on, but that cannot stop normal day-to-day life, or rather, people refuse to stop. And as such, if we want to strengthen the civil institutions and the society that we're seeing, then it's high time that we started curtailing kind of resources that are of defense towards the Sudanese military and seek a method of disarmament, not just the Sudanese Armed Forces, but the rapid support forces as well. And through this disarmament, then we can be able to, or at least ceasefires, then we'll be able to send in supplies, packages, and continue normal day-to-day life. At the end of the day, this whole situation is only hurting the economic potential of Sudan. So regardless of whether they say of different ideologies, for every person lost, that is a great talent, a great profession that could have developed the nation through their own way, has been essentially lost. And if we look at the death toll, we're talking about, 500 plus? Just in Khartoum alone, we're not talking about Darfur and the other areas going on there. A lot of people who have passed away are academics as well, who have played a prominent role in humanitarianism in Sudan. Now that they're gone, we're really going to have to see a more peace-building kind of, not exercise, but a society where we have to replenish those minds that we have lost if we want to go forward in the future. So if anything, I don't have the complete answer to that, I will admit, but it is something that I'm more than willing, and people like myself are willing to explore and to solve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elbashir Idris, for joining us on this conversation. We do hope that this will come to an end and bring peace to Sudan. Thank you for joining us in the conversation.
Thank you very much.